Hey, hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. Hey, hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. This is a Chocovi microphone. If this was a real microphone, it would sound something like this. Hey, hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. Hey, hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. Hey, 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 1, 2. Check 1, check 2. Check 1, check 2. Hey, hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2. Check 1. I don't know. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Hey, hey. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1. Check 2. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Check 1. Check 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. 1, 2. This is a check. It's taking very long to check this. Check 1, 2. The room.
Good morning. My name is Ryan LePage, and I am your Student Association President. I want to thank you all for joining us this Remembrance Day, as we honor the brave men and women who have served and sacrificed, and continue to do so for our country. We are here today not just to remember them, but because of them. Because of our armed forces, Canada has remained a free, democratic country. Because of them, we have the freedom to choose our religious and political beliefs. Because of them, we have law and order, equality, education and peace. We can vote. We can speak freely. We can be who we are without fear of prosecution. We have these rights and freedoms because of the men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces. I am honored to be here today in the company of two of those men, retired Lieutenant Barrie Hodgins and active Canadian Forces Lieutenant Commander Mark Shepard. We thank you for your service. I would like to welcome and thank the Oshawa Civic Band, Zeta Psi Fraternity, and my Student Association colleagues Samir Khan and Ashley Bennett. I would also like to welcome and thank Durham College President Don Lovisa and UOIT President Vice-Chancellor Tim McTiernan. I am proud that we stand together in remembrance. That's what we need now, to stand together, united, as a community and as a country. As we go about our day-to-day lives, it can be all too easy to forget the risks that constantly face our servicemen and women, whether we're in times of conflict or times of peace. Here at home, we're removed from it. We may hear about fighting overseas on the news, or see a procession along the highway of heroes, but then we go back to our homework, to our classes, to our jobs, our families, our social lives, and we forget. Until we are reminded, in the most tragic of ways, when those risks literally hit home and two of our servicemen are killed right here on our own soil. The deaths of Corporal Nathan Cirillo and Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent were both heartbreaking and terrifying. This doesn't happen in Canada. Canada is a safe place, a happy place. That's why it's more important than ever that we are together. Together, we remember our fallen servicemen and women. Together, we ensure that their loss is not in vain. Together, we make Canada the great place it's always been, a place worth fighting for. Before we are let know Canada, I'd like to share this quote from Justin Trudeau. We should remember who we are. We are a proud democracy, a welcoming and peaceful nation, and a country of open arms and open hearts. We are a nation of fairness, justice, and the rule of law. Thank you. Can everyone please be seated? have a speech by our Durham College President, Don Lovisa.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking our students for arranging the ceremony this morning and helping us reflect. Today we are gathered to remember the thousands of Canadian men and women who have sacrificed their lives fighting for freedom and democracies overseas and here at home. We reflect on the great sacrifices made by Canadian men and women, along with key victories in the hard-won battles in 2 world wars, the Korean War, and countless others. We also recognize the Canadian Armed Forces personnel who are currently deployed overseas, working side by side with soldiers from other nations in Haiti, South Sudan, and the Middle East, among others. While we continue our day-to-day activities, coming to campus to work or to study, interacting with our colleagues and classmates, enjoying time with our family and friends, and making plans for the future, these men and women are putting their lives on hold. They are willingly and without hesitation entering into the incredible, dangerous situations, facing unpredictable circumstances and outcomes, leaving the life that they were living and their families and friends behind. These men and women are doing this in the name of freedoms we enjoy on a daily basis, to protect human rights in Canada and around the world, and to uphold the principles of democracy in our country that our country was built upon. It's also important that we remember and pay respect to the Canadian Armed Forces personnel who are serving here at home. Last month, as you know, Canadians coast to coast were sadly reminded of the commitment and sacrifice made by our soldiers here in Canada when attacks were carried out on our own soil. Today in particular, we honor Patrice Vincent, the 53-year-old Canadian Armed Forces warrant officer killed in a targeted hit and run just outside of Montreal. Warrant Officer Vincent, who spent 28 years in the military, had volunteered to help another warrant officer in completing an administrative procedure when he was attacked. We also honor Corporal Nathan Cirillo, who was killed by a lone gunman at the young age of 24 while standing guard at the National War Memorial on Parliament Hill in downtown Ottawa, Canada's national place of solemn remembrance on October 22nd. As the body of Corporal Cirillo, who left behind a 5-year-old son, was returned to his hometown of Hamilton on October 24th, he was met by countless Canadians as they flocked to bridges across eastern and southern Ontario to pay their respects during a solemn trek along the highways of Hero. This remarkable show of solidarity, which saw Canadians proudly waving their national colors, including more than 250 people gathered on the Brock Street Bridge in Whitby, saw us come together to recognize his sacrifice. Much like today, when we remember and honor the sacrifices made by our troops, both here and abroad, it is critical that we remember the differences our soldiers make and continue to make in our country and in nations around the world. 2014 marks the 100th anniversary since the First World War. In this centenary year, we remember the many soldiers who were part of the Battle of Ypres, the Battle of Vimy Ridge, the Battle of Passchendaele, and many more. In 2014, when we watch the evening news, flip through the newspaper, or pursue the headlines online and via social media, we are inundated with news about tense international relations, military attacks being carried out against innocent citizens abroad, and fallen Canadian soldiers. Although we feel the weight of these horrifying stories that are being reported around the world, it is crucial to continue to share these stories, to honor our veterans, and remember the contributions and sacrifices they have made to this country. It is up to all of us to remember the war veterans and the peacekeepers who keep us safe. Let us not allow these sacrifices to be made in vain. Today, as we remember these brave men and women, let us keep in mind how fortunate we are to live, work, and study in Canada. Remember all of those who are helping to make Canada and the beautiful nation it's always been to continue to be. Let us not forget. Thank you very much.
We will now hear a speech from the UOIT President, Dr. Tim McTiernan.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of those people in the Student Association and in the community at large for organizing this event and for all of you for being here. It's an important day to mark what we have as a country and to recognize and honor our citizens, both our current citizens and those who have passed in times before us. Today is a day where we can stand together in a shared memory and a shared testimonial to those who have committed to service, and particularly to those who are important. Days of ceremony like today and monuments are important in marking the course of our history and the choices and decisions we have had to make as a nation in developing the democracy and the culture and the values that we hold dear. Days like today and the monuments that reflect what we're honoring and what we're respecting on days like today span a vast swath of history, cover, as Don has just said, an array of wars, an array of military interventions and police forcing and peacekeeping. And in many ways, how you focus on days like today is such that there are key initiatives and key activities that sometimes get lost. We seldom talk about the MacPap regiment in the 1930s. In the 1990s, the heroic efforts of Canadian armed forces in the Medak pocket sometimes get lost. But it's an opportunity for us to reflect on the vast array of times in the vast geography of this world where Canadians have been called to serve and they have risen to serve. And it is important that from time to time we gather together to reflect and honor on the sacrifices that has been made. But in many ways, today is a marker in our day-to-day lives as we connect with and think about and engage with the fallen and the injured. I spent 18 months, too long ago to be specific about it, in a period of my life, living in 10 Antwerp Street, Whitehorse, Yukon. I thought about that for the first time in a while today. And 10 Antwerp Street intersected with Nijmegen, Dieppe, Ortona, Casino were all streets in the complex in which I lived. It was an ex-military complex in Whitehorse, and it captured the major battles, not all of them, but the major battles that Canadians were involved in the Second World War. And it was a sense of history, but a sense of history that was remote until about 8 years ago. I was driving on the autostrada from Naples to Rome, and there on the right-hand side of the road, back in off the road, but overwhelming in its presence, was Monte Cassino. And you go, Canadian soldiers were there? It was vertical cliff with buildings on the top. And you got that sense of, oh my gosh, what that must have taken. Same way my wife describes being on the beach at Dieppe and being at Vimy Ridge. It brings the abstract to reality. So I will say what today means to me as a new Canadian, and its importance personally as well as a Canadian citizen. My mother served in uniform in the Second World War. She was a naive, young, idealistic kid who was trained to be a radio operator and was stationed in Leicestershire. and the job of her unit was to pick up German intelligence signals and feed them into Bletchley Park. And a couple of years ago, she got a certificate giving her the freedom of Bletchley Park, signed by Gordon Brown. She was one of the last few remaining members of her unit who was alive, who actually got that recognition when she could understand she was getting the recognition. One of her first boyfriends was a Canadian who died on the beach in Dieppe. And in many ways, that was an early introduction for me to Canada. Last May, when my mother had joined her friends who had passed away, we were at an event shortly after she was buried. And there was a man sitting on a chair who was a neighbor of my brother. And he had served in the Irish Defence Forces in the Belgian Congo in the 1960s. And it was a peacekeeping exercise. The Irish lost 6 of their members one day, which was in a small population island, a catastrophe of immeasurable proportions. He served with Canadians, and his interest was in connecting with Canadian soldiers who may have served in that peacekeeping force, because they were comrades together. And they had been on a mission that was incredibly important as a UN mission together. And he had a sense of connection and a sense of the terrific job that Canadians had done that left me overwhelmed in terms of the impact that our armed force members have when they work with other colleagues abroad. I got that again a couple of years ago, just before I joined UOIT. My wife and I went on a long road trip down the eastern seaboard of the United States. And we were sitting in a bed and breakfast in Ocracoke Island on the Outer Banks at a place called Pam's Pelican Retreat. So it was a little bit out there. And there were a young couple sitting across from us at table at breakfast in the morning. And we chatted, and it turns out he was on leave from military service. He looked like any one of our students, and his partner did look equally young. Turns out I asked, wasn't specific about where, I asked if he'd ever served overseas. And he said, yeah, he'd done 4 tours of duty. And I said, well, we're Canadians, so we don't quite, sort of understand all about military service in the United States. And he said, yeah, I know Canadians. I stood beside them. And you get that sense, again, in a very personal way, of the commitment, the intensity in which our people serve, whether they're on the front lines or whether they're not on the front lines, and how they represent us as a country. And you see that, as we've seen in Oshawa and Whitby and Ajax and Pickering, and along the Highway of Heroes and down to the coroner's office, as our young service people return for the last time. And you get a sense of immediacy from the personal stories, but it's still over there, and it's not over there anymore. We've seen that in the last couple of weeks, as Don has so eloquently said, but we've also stood as a country for the values that we represent. And they are, as has been said already today, values of inclusiveness, values of welcoming, values of a sense of service, and values of a sense of doing the right thing. And let us remember the people who have served, who do serve in doing the right thing. And let us remember those who have returned from awful situations, who still carry that with them, and who need all the help we can give them as they reintegrate and get whole and get well in our society. And let us commit to standing by them as well. Thank you.
We will now hear from Lieutenant Commander Mark Shepard.
I'm going to have to take off my hat because it's too tight. I think it's a military tactic. When it's tight, you can't think for yourself. To bring a little realism to the abstract, I'm just a farm boy from PEI. I did 19 months combat operations, southern Afghanistan, Helmand Province, Kandahar Province. Most of my time spent Kandahar City, the districts of Maiwand, Arghandab, Panjwai, Dand. They're the spots I know well. That part of my life's 2.5 years ago. And Afghanistan, I dare say, is very much still with me and has made me a better person, being exposed to Islam, being exposed to Pashtun-Wali, being exposed to tribal politics of a very conservative place. Never expected to be there. My first tour was 2008, and you could have asked me in the spring of 2007, and I would have told you were crazy if you had told me that in less than a year I'd be in southern Afghanistan. Like I said, I learned French in school. I got a BSc in biology from UPEI, played soccer for the UPEI Panthers, and then I went to Vimy Ridge as a student tour guide. And I think that program's still open to you. So it's the Federal Student Work Experience Program. You apply, you have to memorize a few speeches, you have to know French and English, which is tough for an Anglophone from PEI. But that's, to me, the TSN turning point personally. It changed my life. I actually worked and lived on a battlefield and also a war memorial. My French friends all had to do at that time their mandatory military service, like a lot of countries in the world. I just returned from Israel. I did my hand-to-hand combat course there, and they all do 3 years, boys and girls, right? So, upon my return, thinking that military service was cool, I joined the Navy, hence the fancier uniform. And the Navy was cool. I got to learn how to drive a warship. But going around Newfoundland was not so cool. So I found out about a few specialties that the military had. One was civil military cooperation, or CIMIC. Another one was psychological operations, PSYOPs. Sounds much more nefarious than it really is. And information operations, amongst others. So that's what I started doing. The military was good enough to send me to the military college, so I got my master's degree. They've since taught me a couple more languages. My Pashto is not too bad for anyone who speaks Pashto here. Zangiye, Ishme, Shpunke De. That's shepherd in Pashtun. And I brought a presentation because although Afghanistan tends to give you a lot of negative press, one of the things, if you could throw that up. Go back one slide, please. There's the Afghan National Army. That's the 2 Canada Commandos. Your bottom left-hand screen, that's Colonel Hassi. He was the Afghan National Army in Mula. I spent about 7 months with that man, and the Taliban really hated him because he was a very, what they considered moderate Muslim. And considering how piously he prayed every day, I didn't consider him moderate at all. Excellent man. They actually killed him in September 2008, specifically targeted by a suicide bomber on a bicycle. Next slide. And as you can see, it was tough to get around. I've been blocking it more times than I can count, shot at, blown up a couple times, but that was the environment in which we were working. Next slide. Those are some of the females. Chelsea Braybrook up in your upper left-hand
British SAS, American Special Forces females that would go out with me on a regular basis to provide medical attention out in the rural areas. Because we forget about security. We always think about gun or police, but there's human security. If your kid falls down and you have nowhere to take them to get their arm in, right? That's a different thing. Next slide. And that was my war. I was stuck in a situation where it's guerrilla warfare. There's an insurgency that's against the government. And the irregular warfare I'd fight was counterinsurgency or point. So I did that by teaching children how to read, by feminine hygiene and hand washing programs, by teaching Afghans how to look after their livestock and the plants, even starting a female radio station. Because the Director of Women's Affairs, her biggest problem was not being able to speak to the females out in the rural areas. Next slide. And these just weren't off-the-cuff things. We put a lot of thought into them. Next slide. That one there, the Director of Martyrs and Amputees. We had learned in the past that if we got an Afghan government member too popular, the Taliban would tend to kill him. But this guy also looked after the movement, Taliban. So we engaged him. We got a whole bunch of broken wheelchairs, don't ask me where, they just sort of showed up. We ran a program where the amputees learned how to repair them, so that they could repair their brother amputees. We ended up training about 400 people in that program. Next slide. And then schools. We had talked about it earlier, but schools is a very difficult thing. We have our idea of schools, electricity, running water, and for a lot of other places in the world, they don't have that. So their idea of schools is just a modular tent that you would have thrown in the garbage, and paper and crayons and pencils. But the Canadian Army was pretty gung-ho on schools, and all the ones in green were operating and running when we left. The ones in red still needed teachers, and the one in yellow were just about complete. And that was in July of 2011. Next slide. And that's me, still active, still at it, still love it.
Yeah, my poor mother, she never knows where I'm calling her from, which is fine. So, in the Navy, we have a toast for every day of the week, and on Mondays it's to our ships, and to Tuesdays it's our Navy, and on Wednesdays it's ourselves, so that's why I talked a little bit about myself and what I was doing. But I just want you to know that although Afghanistan is looked at in different lights, I was there. I was spending $1.1 million of their money monthly on programs, 36 programs and projects, 3 of which are still running, even though it's been 3 years. The Director of Women's Affairs got a Courage Award from Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. And that was a Canadian project, right? That's impressive stuff. And it continues today. My hat goes off to the guys in northern Iraq helping the Kurds right now against ISIS. People in the Sudan and Mali, all over the place. And I can relate. So, yeah, it's with humility. I admit that I am a veteran. I never considered any of my exploits as great as my grandfather's or their friends, but I guess that's because it seems recent and real, and it is part of my job. So with that, thank you very much for having me. Thanks for listening about my exploits. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And we continue on the efforts of those uniformed men and women before us, just trying to do the right thing. Thank you.
In closing, I would again like to thank you all for joining us and thank all those who participated in this ceremony. I would like to extend a special thank you to Rick Doucette, who was the core organizer in putting this all together. Today, remember those who serve, those who have served, and those who lost their lives in service. Let's not forget them when we leave. On the calendar, there's only one Remembrance Day. Only one November 11th. Let's make it our mission to keep our servicemen and women in our hearts and on our minds all through the year. Thank you very much.
Whatever, you can't multitask. You're female. You're supposed to be able to do more.